Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stefano Monti. I'm the president of the European Nuclear Society, and I would like to welcome all of you to this new webinar organized by the European Nuclear Society and the Euratom Supply Agency, titled Is Europe's Nuclear Fuel Market Resilient Enough? Well, today we'll try to answer these and other questions around the key topic of nuclear fuel supply in Europe, especially considering the current global situation, also the rising geopolitical uncertainty, but also the large expectations in terms of fuel availability from the new nuclear, which has been announced in Europe. So we'll do it thanks to the Euratom Supply Agency, the insights, data, and trends of its latest annual report recently published, and I really invite you to read carefully this very interesting report. And we do, above all, thanks to the expert here with us today. So I would like to welcome the ESA Director General Michael Hübel, and then the head of the Nuclear Materials and Fuel Market Unit, Stefano Ciccarello, and last but not least, the Chief Economist, Dariusz Kozak. So without further ado, I would like to invite the Director General Hübel to start his presentation on ESA, the role, the activities of the agency, and how we are also interested to understand how you collect the data, which are the basis of your deep analysis. So please, Dr. Hübel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefano, and welcome also from our side, from Luxembourg, from the Euratom Supply Agency. Really, just a few words first to thank the ENS for organizing this meeting. I think it is a very timely meeting, a very interesting meeting. And even if I'm not sure whether we will answer yes or no to the question in the title, certainly I hope that through the presentations and through the report itself, which is available not quite in the final form, but in a sort of unedited and unlayouted form, as we call it, on the website of the agency, we can contribute a certain amount of evidence towards answering the question about resilience, which you're asking in the title. ESA is a Euratom agency, and our role is really to secure the supply for the European nuclear industry across the fuel cycle, in particular in terms of the supply of what the treaty calls ores, so basically source materials and uranium, but we also follow the development down the fuel cycle into enrichment, into conversion, and all of this is reflected in the annual reports. And Darek, in his presentation, he will also give you a bit of an idea how some of the key figures mentioned in the report come about. I would just like to underline that it is a very volatile situation for the fuel cycle for the European nuclear industry, and Stefano mentioned a number of the key points, in particular the geopolitical situation we're finding ourselves into. Not just since the beginning of the war in Ukraine in 2022, but really even going back a number of years, where concern has been rising about the security of supply and the, shall we say, self-sufficiency of the fuel cycle within the Euratom community, within Europe. And you may be aware that as a new element, really with the new commission coming in, the new energy commissioner coming in, there is a very strong political will to reduce, phase out, and end dependency on Russia in terms of all energy supplies. And the Commission has published at the beginning of May a roadmap, which is called a roadmap towards ending Russian energy imports. And it covers also, and it covers very strongly also, the situation in the nuclear field. So we will not be able to answer questions about the specific measures under the roadmap, but clearly that is one of the elements which determine the landscape we are working in. And the second and maybe more forward-looking and positive element is what Stefano also mentioned, which is the growing interest in nuclear. We have member states who have started and are intending to start new nuclear programs. We have decisions in member states which are taken to continue with nuclear, to embark on long-term operations, to develop new technologies like SMRs, AMRs, and so on. And that will have an impact, of course, and already has an impact on the supply situation. And as we prepare for that, the statistics we collect are not just statistics which feed into a publication, the annual report, but they're also statistics which feed into long-term projections, which we are developing also together with Commission colleagues to look at what we will need to expect and what market actors have to be prepared for in terms of the development of the nuclear sector over the coming decades. And alongside, I should not deflect from the annual report, which is an important product, but alongside the annual report, and almost at the same time, our colleagues in the Commission have published the Nuclear Illustrative Program, which people call the PINK. And the PINK also gives an idea of the projections for the future of the nuclear developments. And it is a projection which really shows that nuclear has an important future in Europe, and it is something we will really, when we look at the bread and butter of security of supply, we have to take into account. So we have prepared two presentations for you. My colleague Dariusz Kozak will first present a few of the basic figures we have put together at the annual report. For those of you who have actually looked at it, that's more or less built around chapter 1 of the report. And then my colleague Stefano Ciccarello will say a bit about the recommendations we have put into the annual report to the different actors in the fuel cycle to really be prepared and be as resilient as possible, to take up the word, in the current situation. So Stefano, if you agree, maybe Dariusz could start with the first presentation.
Yeah, I just would like to remember to the audience that we will take all your questions at the end of the presentations, and when we dedicate a time to answer them. So I would like to invite the audience to write their possible question in the chat, and then we will try to address all of them at the end of the presentation. So let's start with the first presentation, I understand, by Mr. Kozak.
Yes, thank you, Stefano. Thank you, Michael, for introduction, and thank you to ENS for having us here. I think it's first time for me to be the webinar organized by ENS, and it's a great pleasure. So as already introduced by Michael, I'm going to present to you the main findings of our statistical analysis of supply and demand of nuclear fuel in the EU. After my presentation, Stefano Ciccarello will provide you with ESA's recommendations on security of supply policy. Just a few words of introduction about our statistics. I guess that many of you may know, but maybe not everyone. Euratom Supply Agency has a mandate to monitor supply and and demand of nuclear fuels in the EU on the basis of Euratom Treaty. And every year we send out questionnaires to all EU utilities. Today we have 14 utilities located in 12 member states. We send questionnaires and we ask for detailed data on supply and demand, on purchases strategies. We monitor inventories and we ask utilities for future forecasts on their requirements for natural uranium and enrichment services. On this basis, we produce annual report, our statistical analysis, which I'm going to present to you. If you would like to consult the report, it is since end of June on our website, and it provides with much more information than statistical analysis. You will find there much more about our policies, also about nuclear developments in the world and in the EU. So nuclear is, as we all know, is very important mix in the energy of the European Union. It accounts for almost 24% of electricity production each year. Starting with my first statistical slide, I'm going to present a figure for fuel loaded and fuel purchased by utilities. You see on the graph two lines, green and blue. Important thing is that in the past, utilities used to, before 2022, they used to load more fuel into reactors than they were purchasing, and this trend has changed in 2022, when clearly utilities started to purchase more fuel than loading into reactors. Of course, it reflects current geopolitical situation, conflicts in Ukraine, which defragmented nuclear market, which provided with some barriers and which made some trades more cautious. Demand for natural uranium in the EU accounts for 20% of global requirements. In 2024, utilities bought approximately 14,000 tons of equivalent of uranium, and they loaded 12,000 tons. Important thing to mention here is that utilities in Europe use only 5% of so-called domestic sources of uranium. These are, of course, secondary sources because there is no production of uranium, of natural uranium in the EU. This accounts savings in uranium by using MOX fuel and reprocessed uranium. Next slide gives you the overview of the past 10 years of the purchases of natural uranium. Natural uranium comes to European utilities from diversified sources, but we have to underline that over 84% of all supply come from four big producing countries, basically Canada, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Australia. On this slide, you can see that almost half of natural uranium, basically, or namely 42%, comes from CIS countries. This accounts Kazakhstan and Russia, and small quantities from Uzbekistan. About 60% comes from all over the world, including Africa, Canada, and Australia. In 2024, CIS deliveries went down by almost 14% after a strong increase in 2023. Deliveries from Africa seem to be decreasing year on year. we observed a trend of diminishing quantities of uranium coming from Africa. Last year, the decrease compared to the previous year was more than 50%. Sorry, I have a problem with changing the slide. Okay. Reactor's requirement is a very conservative figure, which is based on the forecast of utilities. They provide us prognosticated data for future requirements for natural uranium and enrichment services. You see here that the graph goes down over the next 20 years. The natural uranium gross requirements, they drop from almost 13,000 tons in 2025 to less than 9,000 to 8,000 tons in 2044. This is based on real data coming from utilities, and it shows the fleet which is now operating and its requirements for natural uranium, including all lifetime extensions and new builds, but only those which are already under the construction. So we have to say that we do not include here any plans or ideas, announcements of member states, which we hear currently quite often about new builds, because here the criterion to be in the statistics is to have at least construction permit for new builds. If we take into account all the plant reactors, of course, the demand is supposed to increase in the next 10 years, for example, but it is not included here. The complementary analysis, if you are interested, is included in pink, which was mentioned already by Michael. There, based on projections of DG Ener, we provide with different scenario, which includes also those projects which are likely and more and less likely to be implemented in the future. As regards indigenous sources, which I mentioned before, we have two sources of so-called indigenous sources, so domestic sources of natural uranium. This is the use of MOX fuel and reprocessed uranium. The overview of the next 20 years prognosticated use of those two sources indicate a strong increase in the use of reprocessed uranium and a stable use or slight increase in MOX fuel. At the same time, inventory usage is going to diminish slightly after 2037. This is, of course, a source of uranium, secondary source of uranium, which ESA advocates very strongly to incorporate into fuel in the EU, because it strongly contributes to European Union security of supply, since the technology for using both MOX and reprocessed uranium are within the EU. Every year we publish annual prices. We calculate three different uranium prices: spot, multi-annual, and Mach 3 price. All of them tend to follow world trends, which are increasing, of course, starting from 2020. In our report, you can also consult prices in dollars per pound. Here we have prices in euros per kgu. As a spot price was down by 11%, but in the long run, it is much higher, 50% higher than the prices in the past years, ending in 2020, in the year 2020. As a multi-annual, which is a long-term spot indicator was up by 23%, and Mach 3 is 50% up year on year. Mach 3 price is calculated on the basis of current or last year's contract. It takes into account only 3 years in the past. Multi-annual indicator includes all the contracts that are in the are running in utilities, which means also contracts signed many years ago. As regards conversion services, they come from diversified sources. Basically, the overview shows you 3 companies which over the years provide services of conversion to the EU. About 30% each year is provided by EU company Orano. Next, as regards quantities, is Russian Rosatom. Orano provides 30% for 2024, Rosatom more than 26%, and then American and Canadian companies Converdyne and Cameco provides the rest of services. Important to say here is that we trace here not only separate conversion contracts but also other contracts. So we trace conversion services included in other contracts like purchases of UF6 or EUP, also in bundled contracts for fuel assemblies. As it concerns deliveries of enrichment services, here we have an overview of the past 10 years. 60% or more than 60% each year is normally delivered by 2 European providers, Eurenco and Orano. This is the blue chart on the graph. The rest, about 40%, 35% each year, is provided by Russian company Rosatom and unspecified sources. As I mentioned before, utilities started to increase a level of inventories as part of their security of supply strategies. And this particularly we see after 2022. If we compare the amount of inventories between 2024 and 2022, it is up by almost 6%. More than 60% of inventories held in the form of EUP or fresh fuel, which is important from the security point of view. All utilities have sufficient material in their inventory to cover between 1 and more than 3 reloads. It depends on the particular situation of individual utilities. The vast majority of utilities has sufficient material for at least 2 reloads. On the next slides, I'm going to show so-called coverage rates for conversion natural uranium and enrichment deliveries. This is the comparison of future needs of utilities with contractual arrangements with suppliers for the 3 components of nuclear fuel. So first one is contractual coverage rate for natural uranium, which shows that the deliveries for the coming years up to 2030, 2031 even, are very well secured because the lines are oscillating between 122% up to 90% or 88% in 2031. And that means that the utilities, they operate under the framework of long-term contracts. Spot market is very small in the EU. According to the recommendations of ESA, most of utilities enter into long-term contracts which secure their future deliveries for years. Similar situation is for the conversion services. There are many lines here on the graph. Maybe I will not explain all of them, For those who are interested, I invite you to consult our report. Situation is also secured here for the conversion services. Future conversion rate oscillates basically more than 100% until 2031, and then it drops to 90%, which means almost full coverage of in contracts of future needs for next 10 years. The coverage rate for enrichment services, the services are also well secured until 2032. Then the coverage rate drops to 40%, which means there is a scope for new contracts after 2032. If this part of my presentation reflects analysis which we do not do every year. It is so-called gap analysis or future conversion and enrichment capacity versus demand for conversion and enrichment services. Every couple of years, ESA makes an update of this analysis, and we evaluate future demand scenarios for conversion and enrichment, and we identify the gaps between the two, given the demand growth scenarios that are going or are prognosticated to be realized in the coming 20 years. EU demand is based on the future electricity generation capacity projections done by DG Ener. This is what I have been already introducing to you a couple of minutes ago. The full analysis, the part of the analysis you can consult in our annual report, and the full analysis is included in pink. Published also a couple of weeks ago, and it is available on the website of European Commission. I'm sure that many of you already consulted this document. What it says. First of all, of course, if we look into conversion capacity and conversion demand in the EU, current capacity is estimated for about 11,000 tons per year, and is slightly below the needs of all, if we take into account all EU reactors, but it is expected to increase after 2026 when European provider will upgrade their plans. It is supposed to account for more than 13,000 tons by 2029, and then for the currently operating reactors, it's going to be sufficient. And nevertheless, if new build scenario will realize after 2040, it is not going to be sufficient to supply the EU. And the new builds are represented at the graph in the light blue color. Dark blue color represents currently operating reactors, including lifetime extensions and shutting down all reactors. If you look at the same data, but including all the Western reactors and Western capacity, the situation is already different. Western geopolitical regions, their capacity for conversion services accounts for more than 31,000 tons of uranium per year, and is from already today insufficient to supply all reactors operating in Western countries. The gap exceeds 10,000 and slightly decrease to more than 5,000 by 2029, when some operators or operators of conversion plants will upgrade their capacity. Of course, this two figures, or these two charts, we have to look at having in mind that the situation which is shown here describes the situation when Western or EU capacity or Western or EU plants are supposed to supply only EU or Western utilities, and utilities they do not purchase elsewhere. Of course, currently we still operate within the framework of open markets, and both European plants they sell their services outside the EU, and EU utilities they buy conversion services as well, enrichment services outside the EU. Last few slides about the enrichment capacity. Here the situation is a little bit different than as it concerns conversion services. We see that aggregated capacity is sufficient for EU to be self-dependent in case. The combined capacity accounts for more than 16,000 tons of SWU per year, which is above needs of all EU reactors operating, and also those planned for construction after 2030. If we look at the same graph, which includes demand from all Western reactors, then the situation is different. We see that the capacity of enrichment services in Western world accounts for more than 25,000 tons of SWU per year, and it is already now insufficient to supply all Western reactors. The missing capacity exceeds 9,000 tons of SWU per year, and decreases after 2027 when first expansion programs comes online in Urenco and Orano. In the mentioned pink document, you can also see a world scenario which is not provided here, as we do not include it in our annual report. So from my side, it's all. I will give the floor now to Stefano Ciccarello, who will give you some details about security of supply recommendations.
Great, very interesting. Please, Ciccarello, maybe you can elaborate more on the future and the main trends, and also, say some is a recommendation on security of supply in the years to come.
Thank you, and good afternoon to our audience. Let's move to the first slide on the supply recommendations. I mean, the agency every year put forward some recommendation. The basic, let's say, recommendation, of course, they're quite stable, and starting from the recommendation that would respond to the vulnerability that has been caused by the Russian aggression to Ukraine and the changing, let's say, on the market and in the last 3 years. The agency invite authorities, the Euratom world particularly, to consider preparedness at EU and member states level, similarly to other sources of energy, so similar to measures that have been already taken in other energy areas. Such policies and measures would assure a common response and a coordinated response to possible supply chain disruptions and minimize their impact. Among those, we consider, for example, reserving capacity or industry capacity for European users, building common strategic stocks, common purchase mechanism and distribution mechanism, all of which there are already the legal basis in the Euratom Treaty. But I would say the cornerstones, the underneath element remains a solid risk management that should be the driving tool for all the operators, safety regulator, energy regulators, utilities. A risk management that should take into account all elements that can represent a threat to the security of supply, starting from the changing community and national decisions or regulatory decisions, legal and economic ownership of supplies, in this respect as well, look at the risk profile of the commercial partners and the suppliers. An element which in the latest year has raised of importance is as well the physical location and the control of nuclear material, where those are contracted, where storage are based, because exactly logistic has assumed has become a huge risk, and many difficulties have been let's say experienced with the logistic aspect and the transfer of materials. The parties, of course, on the basis of the risk, should draw up measures, and the agency for years devised some basic measures, starting from inventories. We talk about adequate inventories as well at the different stage of the fuel cycle, located as well in trustful locations, again, possibly in diversified set of locations, and then diversification is another mean to assure, another mean to respond to risk and possible threats. Diversification at the level of suppliers, geographical diversification at the level of the origins of the materials and the origin of the services, but as well in terms of logistics, diversification of routes and transport, so having always alternative possibility for the supply. Latest year as well, there has been a higher accent on fuel, so diversification of fuel become essential, is fundamental for the security of supply, and this is an element as well that determines the risk that are under which utilities are for fuel that might be not of European design. For the second year as well, the agency has put forward some specific recommendation on the medical radioisotope production that goes from the diversification of fuel of the research reactors and the need to accelerate such diversification. Look at the material, at the risk related to the supply of the HLU material, together with the possible decision on political decision on what are the objective, the purpose, and ambition with respect to HLU. Political decisions are required in this respect to move towards a strategic autonomy rather than, for example, self-sufficiency in this respect. Other measures should look at enhanced material and stable isotopes security of supply through recycling, but as well through support all means and method of productions of those materials. And last but not least, the establishment of a forecast and monitoring system who could help basically the planning as well and let's say of making possible the condition to provide medical radioisotopes where and when they are needed. Next page, please. If we give a look at the future, the agency continue to recommend to establish multi-annual contracts. Multi-annual contracts should enable industry as well to provide for capacity and execute or perform the due investments. We know that this is one of the elements that is fundamental for the industry to invest and build the capacity that are needed. We have seen from Dariusz a presentation on the Western capacity requirements and the availability of Western capacity in the fuel market. And this certainly one of the elements to make this to make available such a capacity are long-term commitment from users. In this respect, we remind that commitment for more than 10 years, although with a specific authorization may be as well granted by the agency and the European Commission, but as well political commitment are required for the industry to have to secure such investment and the certainty in the future landscape. If we look more at what might be required in to enable nuclear expansion and development, there are three elements that in our report have been highlighted. On the one hand, the need for a clear strategy, whether it would be at national or European level, a strategy that could provide clarity to industry once again. But as well, I mean, we have seen from the analysis that although the EU in general has enough capacity for in the fuel cycle, at least for the steps in the area that concern conversion, enrichment, or fuel fabrication, there are some. The EU is quite exposed in terms of import of nuclear materials, and in this respect, there is a wide diversification. However, to the security of supply, wider diversification would highly contribute, but as well aspects of related to the indigenous production of materials for let's say of supply of as feed for our nuclear reactors should be looked at. We talk in this respect. We look at recycling the uranium products, so plutonium from spent fuel or depleted material, whether including them in MOX fuel or or re-enriching them with new technology, or looking as well at technology that can make use of such material, like, for example, fast breeder reactors or the latest and new technology on advanced reactors. So in this respect, the agency invites member states to give due consideration to the closed fuel cycle. And another element that is highlighted, and we see many announcements for member states of new nuclear power plant with foreign technology, and the agency reminds the need as well to think about fuel diversification already from the start, from the establishment of the OPC contracts, the engineering contracts, because diversification remains one of the means to guarantee a security of supply. And with this, I've concluded a quick panorama of the recommendation as well, in, I would say, in the interest of time, and to allow the audience to ask questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive and well, really interesting overview of the fuel supply in Europe. Now we have also, I mean, a clear understanding on how you collect the data and how your evaluation and analysis are based on. From this point of view, so now we understand that your analysis are based on data coming from the utilities, which means that basically are data based on contracts, so not really on plans, announcement, expectation. From this point of view, how are you factorizing the possible life extension of a number of nuclear power plants? Again, these life extensions have been announced, but I mean, the probability is very high, and we know that 60% of the nuclear power plant fleet in Europe should underneath this life extension. So how do you take into account this particular case?
Well, in our case, the future life extensions are included in future requirements, the slide that you have seen, and which are there are life extensions which are approved and which are reported to us by utilities. As you said, that there are many lifetime extensions which are anticipated to take place in the future, but I will not give you any percentage number how much of them are included or not, but I can say that those which are the policies which are not yet approved by, for example, by the governments, they are not included in our statistics. Therefore, future requirements forecast that we show in one of our slides identified downward trend in the future requirements for European fleet. We can say that it is conservative approach, because it doesn't include any optimistic view for future development of nuclear fleet. But having it in mind, we also anticipate increase in the future demand by producing different analysis, different reports, like, for example, mentioned analysis of future demand and future requirements for conversion and enrichment, which we included in pink.
I understand. So now, looking a little bit further to the future, I fully agree with you that I mean, to take into account somehow the big expectation in Europe regarding the new realization, not only large reactor, but also SMR, AMR with different type of fuels. So we clearly need a clear strategy. So how do you engage from this point of view with the different stakeholders in Europe? Do you interact with the European Commission or with the producer, etc., in order to somehow agree the strategy and then go ahead with the kind of implementation, even take into account all the uncertainties? I mean, in order to be prepared in case this new nuclear will materialize. Of course, we don't want to have a disruption in one of the key elements, which is the fuel supply. So are you interacting and how with the other players in Europe in order to define and agree this strategy?
Well, of course, we are interacting. We are an agency of the Euratom community. We work very closely with the other institutions, particularly with the colleagues in the Commission. And I have mentioned, and also Dariusz has mentioned, the illustrative nuclear program, which is probably the most developed strategic document in terms of really longer term projections in Europe. And we have very strongly contributed with our data and our analysis into that document. And in that sense, the development of a long-term strategic approach clearly is less in the mandate of this agency than it is in the mandate of the Commission, and it is really embodied in the pink. Having said that, we work very closely, not just with the utilities, but also with the other parts of the industry and the member states. We have an advisory committee which brings these different partners together, the member state representatives, utilities, representatives of the nuclear industry. And just to speak about these projections and data, that advisory committee has created a working group which really looked very closely at the way we are presenting data and we are taking things forward. And of course, if I look at some of the points in the chat, that is in a very volatile environment. I don't think anyone has a monopoly on a projection of the future which will have any kinds of guarantee to be proofed against this kind of volatility and development. we feel, I think, fairly confident with the recommendations we make as the supply agency to say, look at long-term commitments in terms of security of supply, look at diversification, look at redundancy, so don't rely on an individual supplier, look at security also in that respect. But it is no doubt a difficult environment, not just because of the issue around disruption, but also about the issue of when new developments come online. I mean, how long will it take for the first small or also the advanced reactor technologies to be really deployed, in what amount? It is simply a situation also where it is for industry actors, maybe it's a bit unpopular to say that, it's for industry actors to take the industrial investment risk, to look at these sort of things which are in the future and then sort of invest into the development of capacity. And indeed, I think I can't speak for the Commission, but I think the Commission's publication of the roadmap, which I mentioned in May, is also triggered by the fact that many economic actors were looking for that political signal towards at least more European, I use Stefano's word, more of your autonomy in terms of the nuclear fuel cycle. I don't know if that answers kind of.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's a complex picture, and it's not easy to combine all the factors and all the players in a unified way. Now, I would like to raise one of the questions in the chat, which, interesting, and you will clarify actually if we can expect some disruption because of the situation in the US. They ask, President Trump executive orders and tariffs have the potential to disrupt the global fuel market. So first of all, is it something that we have to worry about? Do you see in case any risk on that?
Well, we work closely with the American side, let us say, both. I mean, there is a cooperation agreement with the United States and Europe, between the United States and Euratom. So there are contacts at the sort of, if you say, like the public policy side. There are contacts with the American industry and so on. And we have looked at the executive orders, and we see that there is a stock-taking part in the executive orders, and we see that there is a part of a future strategy. I would say two things, really, in response to the question, and maybe colleagues would like to respond. First, I think the very positive element, I think also in the approach of the new American government, is to give a clear perspective for the development of the nuclear industry in the US. I mean, that cannot be wrong. And it will add to this sort of broad expansion of the nuclear sector, which we have looked at before. And the second thing I would say is we are in a very interdependent situation. Let me just take the specific area of the medical field, because that's also been raised in one of the questions. I mean, the Americans buy our molybdenum. The Americans buy European material for medical diagnostics and partly also for nuclear medicine treatment. And some of the source materials comes from the US. This is not something one side can interrupt without hurting itself, if you like. So the interdependency is also an issue which also has to be taken into account as we look at the future in terms of the relations to US actors on the markets. But maybe colleagues would like to add.
Any further comment from the other speakers?
Maybe I would say that when you look at certain specific sections of the executive's order, what you can see as well is the attempt to fill up the gaps that we have seen in the previous analysis that Darek presented of the future conversion and enrichment demand. So to bring, let's say, online capacity of enrichment, capacity of conversion, which do not exist today in let's say, reliable supplier. So it's again there an element of reciprocal reliance, and this would allow as well to have redundancy in the Western market, let's say.
Okay, we have another interesting question, which actually is related to one of your recommendation to European Commission, the member states, which is the fact that we should really maybe increase the approach regarding closing the fuel cycle. So in the chat, I see that there is a related question. They would like to know whether you also address the reprocessing capacity and the MOX fuel manufacturing to enable the increase of the MOX demand. So what is, if you want, your role, specific role regarding reprocessing, closing the fuel cycle, and the related issue of the MOX demand? Not only, if you can not elaborate, not only for light water reactor, but also in perspective, the MOX for fast reactors, which is of different type.
No, actually, we don't address this capacity specifically, though. I mean, you can see that today is quite isolated to a single member states, or anyway, in a most of it, let's say, is a capacity that is made use and required by a single member states. There is very little still that comes from other couple of them. But what we know, I mean, what is clear from the analysis of the reports on the radioactive waste and spent fuel management is that there are several member states who haven't yet taken a decision in that respect. So there is some opening there, but I mean, not yet come to a conclusion in that respect. Although we could see from the chart, this will represent or can represent quite an important source or indigenous source.
Yeah.
Today, I mean, from the chart, the forecast is that in 2033, probably something like 25% of the feed in the EU could be covered or will be covered by reprocessed uranium by those exclusively by the states, basically.
Let me make, because time is running, unfortunately, we have so many questions, but let me make a related, a little bit provocative question. As you know, there are a number of, above all, new startups that they propose very advanced, innovative reactors. I mean, a large fraction of these reactors should use are supposed to use advanced fuel, TRISO, MOX of different type, HALEU, etc. And if you allow me, I see a little bit of mismatch between these expectations and the realities that you have showed today. So do you plan, I mean, do you think that is worth to engage well in advance with these developers, even a startup, to provide a more realistic picture of what we can expect from this point of view in coming years?
Well, if I can start by being equally provocative, I would say that it is for both sides to start developing a realistic picture. And I think this is happening now. I mean, there are many, many interesting ideas. And I think now as investment decisions maybe are becoming a little bit more concrete, it will also become a little bit more concrete what will really materialize. And this work on bringing, if you like, the demand and the potential future supply together is actually starting very strongly. I mean, I can mention the industrial platform for SMRs, where there are whether there's even a work stream on supply and the fuel cycle, and there are other discussions going on as well. I mean, this is an important topic for us as well in different respects. First, really in terms of the market observatory, and this goes even up to the points where we have to look at the way we then collect data from these sectors, where not necessarily the utilities will be at the center of the matter. But more importantly, I think there's a lot of thinking going on in terms of what the needs are and how this can be developed. And if you look at HLEU, there's even investment in Europe, if not in the European Union, to have capacity available in the coming years. And I think you're right, Stefano, but I think many people see this as a need, and there is a lot of discussion going on in terms of creating, looking at what is the real demand and then creating the supply linked to it.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. So a lot of work to do in coming years, which is also good. It means that there is really a renewed interest in nuclear in Europe, including advanced technologies. Unfortunately, our time is over. We would have many other questions, so we take commitment to organize another webinar, maybe next year, when also the full picture in Europe will be most probably clear. It is really a key issue. With the joke, I said no fuel, no party. So of course, is a very important part of the full situation. So with that, I really thank the three speakers. I really thank ESA for its very important work. I invite the audience to have a closer look at your annual report. Very interesting, a lot of interesting data. And with that, thank you also to the participants to this webinar. And well, see you next. All the best and have a good evening.
Well, thank you from our end as well. And I'd like to specifically also thank Remik Baranczyk here, a Deputy Head of Unit at the agency who has been involved in setting up this meeting. Thanks to all, and we're very happy to come back at the right time for a further webinar in the same way. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.